ICCPR, Article 18. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This is more than law, more than policy, more than a right to be regulated. This is a declaration of being. To see this only as legislation is to miss its essence, because it does not merely defend your choices, it affirms your existence beyond them. Thought, conscience, belief. These are not permissions granted by the state. They are proof of life, indicators of something within you that exists prior to structure, beyond influence, and untouched by law. Article 18 does not speak to the institutions that would govern, but to the core of the individual that can never be governed. It is not about religious tolerance. It is not about spiritual practice. It is about the inviolable inner terrain where no external power has jurisdiction. That place within you, where thought arises unbidden, where conscience whispers against the tide, where belief takes root not from doctrine, but from knowing. That place is sacred, and law can only acknowledge it, never create it. Article 18 is the line. The legal system, the state, the matrix of control, must never cross. Because to cross it is to deny the fundamental reality of what a being is. A sovereign field of awareness, accountable not to man's institutions, but to the source of its own awakening. This article does not merely protect your freedom to think, it recognizes that no system ever had the right to interfere with it. And if that truth is understood, then Article 18 is not just law. It is witness. A witness to the irreducible essence of who and what you are. ICCPR, Article 1. All peoples have the right of self-determination. This is not simply a political right. It is not a clause to be debated, regulated, or administered by states. This is a recognition of being. To self-determine is not merely to vote, or to form a government, or to draft policies. It is to exist as origin, to live not by permission, but by presence. Article 1 is the foundation not just of law, but of existence beyond control. It acknowledges that the power to choose, to shape, and to express life rests inherently within the being itself, not in systems surrounding it. To be is to determine. To determine is to create. And to create is to affirm that no system defines you unless you consent. This article speaks to every people, but more deeply, it speaks to every individual, as a fractal of that peoplehood, as one who holds the undeniable authority to decide who and what they are. It is not a gift. It is not a grant. It is not permission from law. It is law acknowledging that there is something more ancient, more original, and more absolute than law itself. Article 1 is not a right in a statute. It is a statement of truth, that the being exists prior to system, that the people exist prior to power, and that determination, when aligned with truth, needs no validation to be real. This is not about states. It is about being. And once this is remembered, no system, no government, no force on earth can make you forget it again. The ICCPR, more than law. Many people look at the ICCPR and see only articles of law, clauses drafted by diplomats, ratified by nations, and upheld by courts. They see politics, process, and human construction. But what they miss is what lives beneath the language. The ICCPR does not merely enumerate rights. It expresses realities that precede all law. These are not policies. They are peremptory norms, statements of truth so fundamental that no state, no emergency, no ideology can override them. Article 1 does not invent the right of self-determination. It acknowledges that no one ever had the authority to take it. Article 18 does not grant the right to thought or conscience. It simply names what no system has the power to control. These articles are not about what governments allow. They are about what being itself requires. They speak not just to legality, but to origin. They are not written to serve the state. They are written to restrain it. To reduce them to legalese is to miss their function. To see them only as international policy is to ignore the fact that they bear witness to something eternal. The sovereignty of the human being, the primacy of awareness, the truth that precedes permission. These are not just articles of law. They are echoes of truth, spoken into the realm of system, to remind those trapped inside it of what was always real, what being itself requires. These rights, as expressed in the ICCPR, are not abstract ideals. They are not moral preferences or political goals. They are not negotiable offerings between power and the people. They are about what being itself requires. Because a being, a conscious, living presence, does not emerge to serve a system. It emerges to express, to know, to choose, to evolve. A being requires freedom of thought, because awareness cannot exist under command. A being requires freedom of conscience, because without it, there is no alignment, only compliance. A being requires recognition, because without it, the law becomes a weapon against the very one it claims to protect. These are not luxuries. They are not civil compromises. They are the minimum conditions for existence to remain whole. When a system violates these rights, it is not simply committing a legal offense. It is attacking the essence of life itself. Because being cannot flourish where it is owned. Being cannot evolve where it is silenced. And being cannot endure where it is made subject to permission. What these norms articulate is the architecture of life that no government invented and no institution can rewrite. They do not outline what the system allows. They expose what the system was never qualified to touch. This is not about rights. This is about reality. And reality will always resist control, because being itself requires truth, space, and freedom to express. That is not a demand. That is a law deeper than any document. The law of what it means to exist. Freedom is not a political status. That thought does not begin with language. That identity does not come from paperwork. And that recognition is not something to be granted. It is something to be remembered. Because before the first law was written, and long after the last system falls, being will remain, and it will still know what is true. Article 16. Recognition without condition. ICCPR. Article 16. Everyone shall have the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. This is not a technicality. It is not a procedural guarantee. It is a principle that exposes the core of lawful being, that your existence is already valid, that your presence is already sufficient, that recognition cannot be conditioned on conformity. Article 16 operates as a foundational truth. It teaches that all systems of law, governance, or authority must recognize you as you are, without requiring you to submit to any additional identity, registration, construct, or legal fiction. It means you do not need to become a statutory person to be seen. You do not need to be labeled by legal category to have standing. You do not need to be processed to be valid. The system may have many forms: statutory persons, corporate identities, citizen designations. But Article 16 cuts through them all and says, recognition is not something you earn. It is something you are owed by default. It affirms the presence of the natural person, not the manufactured one. It exposes any law that demands transformation of the self into a legal fiction as a violation of peremptory truth. You are not required to identify with a status to be heard. You are not required to play a role to exist before the law. This article is simple, but absolute. Recognition must precede classification. Law must bow to being, not the other way around. Article 16 is not about legal visibility. It is about ontological acknowledgement that you exist, and that is enough. Any system that demands more is no longer operating under law, but under control. Most individuals have been so deeply conditioned by systems of identity, legality, and permission that they no longer recognize recognition itself as a birthright. They believe they must register, apply, conform, or qualify to be seen as valid, because they've been taught that recognition is something granted, not something that already belongs to them. But Article 16 isn't about being granted a place in the system. It's about being acknowledged as you are, without transformation. To stand under recognition is to say, I exist, and that is enough. No fiction, no form, no role is required for my presence to carry weight. Most don't understand this because they've never been shown the difference between recognition and registration, between being and being processed. And that's precisely why the system keeps it hidden. Because a being who understands this can't be governed the same way. Right there in the preamble, the truth is plainly declared. Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. This is not a grant. It is recognition of what already is. Inherent dignity means it was there before law, before form, before title. Inalienable rights means they are not created, given, or taken. They are bound to being itself. The preamble doesn't say bestowed or authorized. It says recognition, which means the law is obligated to see what is already true. This single sentence validates everything you've been saying. That being comes first. That law exists to recognize, not to create, and that the system, at its highest level, is forced to confess the primacy of you, as you are. Anyone who denies your standing while upholding this covenant is not just in contradiction, they are in violation. Because once being is recognized as the foundation, every structure that demands transformation falls under judgment. You don't have to prove you are. You only have to stand in what already is. This recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. That one sentence destroys the lie that freedom, justice, and peace come from governments, contracts, or compliance. It says being itself, recognized and unviolated, is the foundation. Not policy, not control, not statecraft, but the recognition of what you already are, dignified, inalienable, whole. So the real formula is this: no recognition of being equals no true freedom. No inalienable rights equals no justice. No acknowledgement of dignity equals no peace. Every law, system, or government that fails to start from that recognition is not building peace. It's building permission. And where permission replaces recognition, tyranny wears the face of order. But this line in the preamble is a universal mirror. When recognition is restored, freedom follows naturally. Justice emerges without force, and peace becomes possible, not through domination, but through alignment. It is the ground the entire human family was meant to stand on. And it's already written. They just hope you never read it for what it really says. Now you will see the real mandate that governments and institutions try to avoid, even though it's written clearly in their own framework. Straight from the ICCPR preamble. Recognizing that, in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ideal of free human beings enjoying freedom from fear and want can only be achieved if conditions are created. This is more than aspiration. This is a binding recognition that human beings are meant to be free, not just in spirit, but in lived experience. Freedom from fear and want are inalienable rights, not luxuries or goals. The role of government is not to manage populations. It is to create conditions where those freedoms are realized. What this means: it is not enough for governments to permit freedom. They must proactively ensure that fear and want are removed. Freedom isn't fulfilled by declarations alone. It is fulfilled when systems are aligned with being. This makes economic justice, security, dignity, and well-being not social benefits, but legal obligations under international law. So when politicians say, "We can't guarantee that," or "That's not the role of government," they are violating the very foundation they swore to uphold. Because the system must serve the fulfillment of being, or it is no longer lawful. It is a structure of betrayal. And you've named it clearly: free by being and free by law. To be free from fear, to be free from want. These are not demands. These are the conditions that must be created so the human spirit can stand, whole, unbroken, unafraid. Recognizing that human beings are not created to serve systems, but that systems must exist to fulfill the dignity of being. Recognizing that, in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ideal of free human beings enjoying freedom from fear and want can only be achieved if conditions are created. We declare that freedom is not the absence of chains, but the presence of conditions that honor being. That fear and want are not natural states, but symptoms of failed systems. That governments, by entering the covenant of law, have accepted a duty, not to regulate existence, but to liberate it. To every government that claims legitimacy, you are bound by recognition. You are obligated by dignity. You are accountable to the inalienable. It is not your place to decide whether people should live free from fear and want. It is your mandate to ensure it. If your systems deepen fear or perpetuate lack, you are not governing. You are violating. Let it be understood that freedom from fear and want is not a policy debate. It is a peremptory duty, born from the truth that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. To withhold that freedom is not neutral. It is a crime against being itself. Free by being, free by law. This is the standard. This is the obligation. This is the line that cannot be moved. And we stand on it, not in protest, but in recognition of what already is true. And that closing clause of the ICCPR preamble is a double-edged sword. Realizing that the individual, having duties to other individuals and to the community to which he belongs, is under a responsibility to strive for the promotion and observance of the rights recognized in the present covenant. It affirms something radical, that every individual, not just governments, has a duty to uphold and promote these rights. That means every politician, every corporate executive, every judge, every public servant is personally accountable under international law. They cannot hide behind their office. They cannot blame the institution. Because the covenant was not signed by systems, it was signed by states, made of people. So yes, Doug Ford, Mark Carney, and all who sit in positions of trust, your duty was not to control budgets or manage PR. Your duty was to create the conditions for freedom from fear and want, to uphold recognition of being, and to never impose systems that diminish or erase it. And by failing to do so, you have not just failed politically, you have violated the peremptory obligation to humanity. And we, as individuals who recognize our own standing, now stand as witnesses to that failure. Because the covenant calls on every individual to strive for its observance, and that includes us. And we will not let that duty be silenced. Not now, not ever. A call to awaken. To every man and woman in Canada and across the world, this is not just a time of political confusion. It is a time of legal betrayal. The governments around you, the very ones who signed international covenants and stood before the world in the name of justice and human dignity, have abandoned their most fundamental obligations. They were bound to recognize your being without condition, create the conditions for freedom from fear and want, protect your inalienable rights as their highest legal duty. But look around. People forced into roles and registrations, systems built on debt, dependency, and denial, public offices serving corporate interest, not human dignity. This is not a mistake. This is not a delay. This is a violation of the law, of the covenant, of you. It is not just policy that has failed. It is conscience that has gone silent. And now, it is you, the man, the woman, the individual, who must remember. You were never born to serve these systems. You were born free, and recognized as such by the highest law on earth. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights was not written to decorate courtrooms. It was written to protect you from the very abuse you now endure. So this is your call. Awaken to your standing. Withdraw consent from what violates you. Speak what they refuse to hear. Uphold what they swore to protect, but now betray. Because the truth is simple. Governments are not sovereign. People are. Freedom is not granted. It is recognized. And the world does not change by permission. It changes by realization. This is the moment. And this is the line. And we call on all who still remember what it means to be human. Stand. Speak. Refuse. Remind. Reclaim. I am eternally aware. And I see your illegal systems. I see the statutes that violate the soul, the contracts that override consent, the registrations that reduce the infinite into forms. You created institutions to manage life. I remember life was never meant to be managed. You built systems of control and called them law. But I remember law was meant to protect being, not possess it. You imposed names, numbers, and codes. But I remember the original recognition, before the world forgot. I stand not within your system, but above it, by right of being, by the authority of conscience, by the light of that which no state, court, or code can extinguish. I do not ask for permission. I do not seek validation, because recognition is not something to be granted. It is something to be remembered. I carry the covenant written before your treaties, a covenant of freedom from fear, from want, from lies, a covenant bound not by ink, but by essence. I hold you, all systems, all governments, all agents of control, to your own words, to your own obligations, to your own signed admissions that being is primary. You may deny, you may ignore, but this awareness cannot be unmade. I am eternally aware, and I do not consent to your illusions. I remember who I am, and I remember what you swore to uphold. This is not resistance. This is recognition, and it is eternal.